Trust in the science that's out there, trust in the training plan, trust in your body's response.
Hello, welcome to the CEDRD, a podcast connecting newer professionals in the field of eating disorders
to those of us who have been around for a while. I'm your host, Beth Harrell, a certified eating disorders registered dietitian and supervisor.
And I'm Abby Brown, a registered dietitian who is newer to the field.
I think of myself as a well-seasoned cast iron skillet with wisdom and experience, yet always ready for something new.
And I think of myself as an Instapot with innovation and a fresh perspective. This podcast brings both to the table to share ingredients, recipes, and techniques of past and present so we can all be our best for the future.
The kettle is heating up. The skillet is on simmer. So join us around the table for true professional nourishment. Abby, ready to stir the pot?
Let's do it.
What fun it is to have Dr. Riley Nickols and Rebecca McConville, or Becca, with us today. And they are talking about sports, psychology of sports, of injury and eating disorders, performance, motivation, dedication, resilience in sport. And I am the fish out of water here because I am the non-athlete. So you can laugh at my questions as we go along, but honestly, learning so much from Becca and from Riley. And you'll hear at the end, Becca is my business partner. So we, a year ago, purchased this house converting to commercial space in downtown Lee Summit. So we are working together and it's really a lot of fun. And Dr. Nickols, if you, in the show notes, check out the webpage of mindbodyendurance.com, there are so many clinicians that are part of his team. So learning from, the seasonings that they provided, Externships, internships, Ron Thompson and Roberta Sherman and their book, Olympic Committee and NCAA. Also, I love Riley's last part. Buckle up, hang in there. We don't know what we don't know. Keep a sense of humor and maintain the joy. So tomorrow, this episode's dropping on May 13th. So May 14th, Becca and Riley will be at Arizona State, and there is a link in the show notes to that, but the CPSDA portion is sold out. And then June 10th, they have a virtual program for you with 4 continuing education units. So check them out.
Welcome, Rebecca McConville and Riley Nickols.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Hello, we are so excited to learn and chat with y'all today. But to get things going, Riley, we've got some icebreakers for you.
Okay. And we don't have Rebecca because we're going to attach you or connect you. We're going to attach you. We're going to connect you to her episode because she's answered these questions.
Oh.
So, breakfast or dinner?
Breakfast.
Oh, that was a quick
Yeah,
answer.
definitely breakfast.
Do you have a breakfast food of choice?
4 eggs, half or full avocado, a couple pieces of bacon, 2 pieces of toast, a banana, and some cherry tomatoes most every morning.
That sounds great. Wow.
Yes, I love breakfast.
And then mountains or beach?
Good question. I would say mountains. Yes.
Okay. Great.
You had to think about that one a little bit more, but then once you said it, you were decisive.
Yes, I love both very much. Growing up, went to the mountains for a week every summer with my aunt's cousins and everyone too. So that tipped the scales. Yes.
All right. Audiobook or paper book, Riley?
Ooh, these days, just for practicality's sake, I would say audiobook. Yes, it's a little bit more convenient. Throw in the earbuds and listen away. So I do like the old school paper book, just the feel of it. But if there's any type of reading going on, I guess auditorily would be, yes, preferred and just practical.
Yeah. I love audiobooks too. It's just quicker. I mean, I can do it anywhere as I'm doing, as
Sure.
Becca, we were talking about this morning, as you're doing your laundry or running errands or whatever, you can listen to audiobooks or podcasts. So our listeners are a variety of folks, and some of them are still in school. Others are quite seasoned. So Riley, going to ask you if you can share with us a story either something funny or scary or anxiety producing about an exam that you had to take, whether it's a board exam or a licensure exam or.
Oh, well, yeah, it's probably the EPPP. And for those psychologists, I guess, listening or out there, know all about the EPPP. I'm not a great at all standardized test taker. It's kind of like the culmination of, your grad school training, studies, and you just got to jump through the hoops. And this was kind of like the final hurdle. Bought some exam books and did the best that I could, but I don't think anyone feels totally prepared, and took it, and just some oddball questions that you feel like have no relevance whatsoever to what you're ever going to do. Did the best we could to kind of stab in the dark, and then really anxious, and got the result. They printed it out, and I went out to my car, and I kind of just like sat there. And this probably tells you like season of life at that time. Well, it hasn't really changed, but it was just kind of in full motion. And I opened it up, I saw a score, and I had no idea what it even meant or like what was passing. So I was like Googling it on my phone. I was like, I don't know if I passed, because it didn't say that. And then I kid you not, by a millimeter, skin of my teeth, I squeaked by. So
Yeah.
So all was right in the world.
It's so funny because I think, Becca, your story was.
And I had to run out there like having a panic attack and the lady's like, I'm not supposed to tell you, but yes, this means you passed. And I was like, oh, I was like crying and like happy.
Yes. And it doesn't matter if it's by the skin of your teeth or not, because some of those questions are things that are even just practice questions. They don't count. Or an area of specialty, you can actually know the correct answer, and you have to try to guess what they want you to say.
Sure.
All right. Well, how did you get into eating disorders work? How did you get into therapy? Did you know that's what you wanted to do? Kind of, how did you get there?
Yeah, good question. So I grew up playing sports my whole life. I just really had an affinity for athletics and played baseball, my passion, and had aspirations to play in college. That was kind of the plan. And life had other plans. A couple of weeks before going to college, I had surgery on my left shoulder as a pitcher, and then went to college in a sling and tried to rehab it throughout my entire freshman year, and played a little bit that year and a little bit my sophomore year, but just never could come back from it. And so kind of the psychology of injury and transitioning out of sport prematurely from kind of my own timeline in a manner that was not my choice really was impactful for me in many ways, just from an identity standpoint. And I thought, wow, I'd love to be able to try to kind of provide some support to athletes in this area at some point. And so I mean, into sports psychology, that resonated with me, the mental aspect of sport and playing and competing, and master's in sports psychology. I ate it up and loved it, but I realized I could address kind of the performance issues, but the clinical issues I needed training in, or else would have to refer out. And I conceptually, I view kind of more clinical issues and sport performance issues as very intertwined. And so I sought more clinical training, went to Fordham, and that was a long haul, but they have like 4 years, essentially 3 years of externships, which is like 20 to 30 hours a week of placement, and then a full year of internship. And my second year worked in college counseling. The first year I had a peer above me who worked in an outpatient eating disorder facility in New York City in Columbus Circle, the Institute of Contemporary Psychotherapy, Center for the Study of Anorexia and Bulimia. And I did it for a couple of reasons. One, it sounded fascinating to me, but then secondly, it was literally about 200 yards from the Lincoln Center campus from Fordham. And so it was very efficient. But as I got immersed in it, I think the population itself of eating disorders just really spoke to me. It's just so sad, I think, for individuals struggling in this manner, but the multifaceted nature of this illness with mood disturbances, trauma, family dynamics and issues were just so layered for me. And so that really resonated. Went on to get another year of kind of more a treatment and addiction world, and then back for another full year of eating disorders because I knew I wanted to specialize in that. All throughout grad school at Fordham for 6-7 years, I coached runners and triathletes in New York City. I've been a triathlon coach and running coach for about 20 years. And so I knew I wanted to work with athletes, and kind of the intersection there, performance clinically and then eating disorders kind of crossed. And then as I was finishing up my dissertation, the Victory program was just kind of conceptually in its framework with Thompson, Roberta, Sherman. and the timing was perfect, and not by my doing, but just like happenstance and total luck. And so then I relocated to St. Louis here to oversee the Victory program. So that's kind of what launched me into the
Yeah.
yeah.
For people who don't know about the Victory program, what is that?
Yeah, so the Victory program is the first intensive eating disorder treatment facility for athletes in the country, and adolescent athletes and adult athletes, so high school, college, elite, and professional, and kind of provide specialized training for or specialized treatment specifically for athletes in St. Louis, Missouri. And I was with Victory for 8 years. And since then, there's been a couple other facilities that have kind of branched off and have had similar, more specialized care. And currently I'm an advisor to ED Care's Athlete Edge program in Denver, Colorado. So excited about that opportunity, but I'm just really thrilled in the field as a whole. There are kind of these specialized providers such as Becca and others who really have the training and sensitivity to working with athletes specifically. So
Sure. I mean, for the dietitian, the CSSD, certified sports dietitian, is a big deal. And so that's really cool that Becca, you have both the CSSD and the CEDS, the certified eating disorders specialist registered dietitian.
Oh yeah, it's definitely come a long way when you think about some of the early stories from, I call Ron Thompson or Roberta Sherman like the godmother and godfather of eating and sport. I think they would be really proud, and I think we've only just begun, so it's exciting.
Yeah. So Riley, what did you use to help train? I mean, there wasn't much there. You talked about Ron. I've already forgotten the other person's name.
Roberta,
Ron and Roberta, because they were in the Olympic. Didn't they write some things for eating disorders for the Olympic Committee?
Yes, they wrote some things for pretty much everything on athletes and eating disorders over the years, because they had an outpatient practice in Bloomington, Indiana, worked with Indiana University athletes there for years and years, and then consulted with the International Olympic Committee and the NCAA and other organizations as well. So I had a wonderful opportunity to really learn from them, just their wealth of knowledge and experience in the outpatient world. And then inpatient or intensive treatments is just a different beast in some regards. There's certainly some overlap there too. But so that was just a really rich experience just from a training standpoint to be in the intensive treatment world. I also had an outpatient practice too. So I could kind of experience kind of the both levels of care, all those levels of care too, which was nice just for
different.
Me.
Yeah. So part of the Seasonings was just being in the right place with people and following some of the research. Was there a book for sports psychologists and eating disorders that you could look towards, or a good research facility? Or since you started at a place that was one of the first in the country, maybe in the world, did you do research?
So we did do research. The book that was out there, shockingly, is from Ron and Roberta, Athletes and Eating Disorders. And I think it was written in, I can't remember, it was either 2011, I can't remember, 12, something like that. But they like, at that time, it was like the only book.
Yeah.
And so, yes. So the short answer is yes. In Victory, at the Victory program, did some research and collect data. We had a full-time data and outcome specialist who like crunched numbers and gave assessments to patients on admission and 30 days and then at discharge. So we did that for athletes too. And then we also looked at more strength and power data. A lot of athletes, of course, are very concerned about their performance, and some, coming into treatment really have worries and concerns about performance decrements and whatnot too, just to being in treatment, making changes to their eating habits and potentially changes in weight, body fat. And so as providers, we all have known for a while that like the body is going to be strongest and most powerful and have most sustained endurance, like when it's nourished and in a state of energy balance. So we know that. I think for athletes, you can tell them that, and it's great, but I think until they actually experience that themselves, there's really understandably so maybe a lack of buy-in or understanding. And so we did kind of have some studies kind of demonstrating strength and power gains, just even in a short time during residential treatment or intensive treatment, that were made despite athletes like training a lot less or not at all initially. eating differently and everything else. So the objective numbers are there to support what we know as providers as well.
And Beth, if I could add to that, I think because there's been so much outdated literature, I think it was usually like if somebody was being treated for an eating disorder in sport, they were thought of leaving their sport. And now we finally have the data to say not only can they return or stay in their sport, but they can actually perform better when they're well nourished and healthy. So I think we're starting to see athletes come earlier for intervention, and we're trying to treat a lot of these clinicians, we're not treating the clinicians. We're trying to educate the clinicians as to how to navigate this with them to get the help and let them believe that they can still thrive.
So what would like a typical day for a patient at the Victory program look like? I'm assuming it's a bit different than, something like ERC.
Sure. Yeah. Good question. And I know there's a lot of similarities between like Victory and then ED Care's Edge program too. It's kind of a, both are like a, kind of think about it as like a track within kind of general programming. So you're in general programming, and then there are special groups for the athletes that they would be pulled from if they're in the athlete track and go to. So in those groups can be anything from, body image, family dynamics, but in both of those, yes, that's more kind of mainstream for eating disorder treatment. But I think with like for athletes, yes, there's body image concerns, but there's also like contextual body image in the context of sport, wearing your uniform, socially too. So it's very contextual, which is a little bit nuanced from non-athletes. And then more of the family work is, yes, family of origin, but athletes spend oftentimes more time with their sport family than they do family of origin. So it's kind of weaving that in as well, and really talking about the dynamics there. Sports psychology group, of course, talking about more psychological skills needed to enhance performance in sport. And I think that I try to take like a strengths-based approach and really bring those strengths and those attributes psychologically as skills and really weave them into treatment as well. Motivation, dedication, resilience, commitment, right? Drive. Those things are totally needed in eating disorder treatment at any level that athletes really can find. So there are specialized kind of groups. Yes, there's like a kind of a fitness group that's supported in terms of integrating the movement and training at some point in treatment also, which is maybe a bit nuanced from maybe more traditional eating disorder treatment facilities. And then the sport family appropriately is integrated and involved in the care. So it's kind of dependent on the athlete, informed consents, of course, and releases, but sometimes coaches too are really involved, especially on the tail end, just to kind of try to be aware and sensitive of an athlete's care so they can kind of, respond accordingly if or when the athlete rejoins. So
it seems like getting back into physical activity is always like the daunting question. It's like, are they ready? Is this okay to do now? How do you decide? Are there boxes they have to check, or what's that like?
Good question. Becca, you please talk. I've blabbed enough.
No, I'm only going to say there's a lot of gray, but having a lot of mutual clients with Riley, it's not the quantity, right? Because especially some of us have been former. If you told me 3 hours was too much, well, that was my first practice of the day. That wasn't the second or the third. But it gets down to the quality, and then what's their reasoning? Why? Like, why are they doing that? And then being able, when they're medically stable, to integrate that into movement, because it's so critical. We can't, only focus on one part of the eating disorder, then send them back to their school where they're maybe full on. You have to slowly integrate that and be walking beside them. And that's where it's so pivotal to have that sports psychology that gets the sport piece of it, the mindset, but also the therapy approach.
Yeah, I completely agree with Becca. And I think it's kind of an art and science, just like kind of setting goal weights, right? I think there is an objective measure. So I think first and foremost, integrate training or movement. There's like a medical stability, which is utterly foundational. So individual needs to be medically stable, or else it's like reckless and risky and dangerous and just doesn't make sense. But just because someone's medically stable does not mean inherently like green light. And I think that's where the more clinical appropriateness is needed. And that's some gray area that is really, there's a lot of facets to it too. So yeah. Of course, Becca can speak maybe nutritionally, but there's also like from a psychological standpoint, an ability to like regulate, manage emotions in other ways that don't involve exercise. Right. Mm-hmm. Or ideally an ability to kind of derive value and self-worth in ways that don't involve workouts or, expending energy. And then there's like a feel too. I think you're working with the individuals, and there's like a perseverativeness on like, hey, can I work out? Can I be approved now? What about now?
Yes.
It's just like clear as day. It's clear as day as a provider. Like the brain still needs to heal, and so I think there's that piece there too, of more to the clinical piece. And I don't know, Becca, you can speak to like more of the nutritional and whatnot too considerations.
Right. Because then that part of that brain just gets activated and you can tell that they're not quite 100% recovered. And I think that goes back to when their sole identity is being that athlete. If they can't engage in that, then they feel like they don't have a lot of self-worth. And that's where I think in the meantime, the therapy component really comes to the surface. Like, well, if I'm not doing my training or moving, I'm not doing anything. Well, you've got some other areas that why don't you go to a movie with a friend? Like they look at you like you're insane.
That's sitting. What do you mean?
Yes.
Right. Gonna go sit. That's just, so you talked about strength and power, performance, body image, all of those things are part of that psychology. And I'm the only one on this call who's not an athlete. So I'm going to come across as really ignorant with this question. So we were talking about heart rate and VO2 max, or someone who may be on a medication that decreases their heart rate, like a beta blocker. And what does that do psychologically to an athlete with an eating disorder? Or do you know?
Well, are you talking about, we kind of were going over a case consultation, Beth?
Mm-hmm.
I think she was talking about when athletes are so number driven and we're told like, oh, VO2 max. Okay, then I better get 100% on that. Then if my heart rate needs to be at this max heart rate, I better hit that. And so some of these wearables and numbers that we talk about, it might give them another thing to gravitate towards as a check the box. But like you said, it's a science. So there's a lot more that goes to it. And we always go back to, okay, that's fine and dandy, but what is your body telling you?
Yeah.
Because who cares if your heart rate is 130, but you feel like you're pushing a 10, you need to back off and rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's something as a coach too. I mean, just the athletes that I coach non-eating disorder, that I gravitate more towards like RPE, kind of by feel, rate of perceived exertion. And then the pace and the watts pushing on the bike is very, very secondary, right? I mean, I think athletes kind of latch onto that. But I do think, though, that sometimes unintentionally, if you give a hard and fast pace that's not appropriate, right, they can be overextending. And that's like not the goal for like periodized training and like workouts that are really scientifically based. And so if you have, and I also think it does not permit an athlete to develop trust with their body. It kind of, there's not attunement there. So I do think we're kind of constantly from a nutritional hunger cues, fullness, emotional, we're trying to foster attunement and trust with your body. And I think I think it's really impactful how coaches deliver workouts and how they're given. And I think if it unintentionally, sometimes they're done so in a way where it perpetuates an athlete to like maybe dismiss their body's cues because I want to hit this pace, which I think there's a time and a place for that. But I also think that, yeah, like Becca said, kind of the RPE is key.
And we often joke, we don't know too many coaches that go too easy on their athletes.
Right.
So it's not like they're not going to push them.
Yeah.
So
you talked about sport family, and it's interesting because, if you're working with an adolescent with an eating disorder, you're working with their family too. And it can be really hard not only to work with the athlete's mind frame, but then the parent mind frame. And so we're replacing that with coach. And these athletes are wanting to really no pain, no gain. That's what the slogan was back in the, 80s or 90s. Is that, hopefully that's not, I don't know. Maybe that's something that's current too. Abby's shaking her head. Yeah.
I don't think it went out of style, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. So rate of perceived exertion. And I think that, if someone's on a beta blocker, then they need to take care of their heart, and they need to eat well, but that can be really hard if they're numbers driven and I didn't know if that meant that they would be burning less calories or that they would be, I don't know why that number would be so important.
Yeah. And I think there's like, I mean, I think when you're on, I'm not a beta blocker expert, but I do think that I think if someone is on that type of medication and it does alter heart rate, right, then I think accordingly, like there just needs to be a shift in terms of their zones and heart rate zones and whatnot too. If there's not an adjustment to that, then it's like inappropriate. And I think it can cause, a lot of frustration too. I think athletes too, if they don't feel like they're meeting markers in their workouts that coaches give, and they get really discouraged, and it can be like confidence eroding. And as a coach, try and construct training that's like confidence building, right? And I think the RPE, rate of perceived exertion, it helps athletes tune into different gears. And a lot of athletes too, they know like one gear, and it's like to hammer, right? And even like professional athletes of all types, like even I'd say runners, there's all kinds of different gears in terms of their running, tempo, pace, recovery pace, and I think there's high value to develop, all those nuanced gears from an intensity standpoint.
Is there some kind of way that you help people reduce that number in their head to, I mean, if they're not really good at looking at their rate of perceived exertion, the RPE?
Sure. Well, I think you can kind of talk about it in terms of like, of RPE of 5 is pretty, you're working, but you can kind of carry conversation with a friend and pretty easily, and as you get up to maybe a 6 or 7, you might have to like stop a couple times, in the middle of a sentence to catch your breath. And so it's kind of giving them cues with their body also. How do you guys as dietitians kind of disrupt that perseveration, even with like the calories, right? Like they don't see an apple, they see 100 calories. Like what strategies do you use to kind of disrupt that process that's so reflexive?
I go back to best favorite word, their interoceptive awareness. Like when they have those foods, how do they feel? Does it impact their hunger for the next meal? Are they able to concentrate on what they're doing? So if they're geared around the calories, they might miss the mark, especially if they're going out, let's say for a nice big training. They're like, gosh, it felt great. I didn't hit my first wall until 90 minutes in because I had such a great breakfast. Woo, it was 300 calories more than I'm used to. But that helps them start to move into that worked for me for what I'm getting ready to do, and holding yourself by a calorie level. From the red standpoint, boy, that's a tricky thing, because if you miss the mark with a calorie deficit that doesn't give you enough energy availability, then we start seeing negative consequences physically and psychologically. So that's where I said, listen to that body and what it needs, because you can't go off calories in equals calories out. We know that's hogwash.
But I can see the athlete mind. I can see the eating disorder mind saying, well, I'm just a wimp. I mean, I'm at a 7 and everyone else is at a 3. So it can be hard not to push.
Completely. And I think that's where the trust comes in with your periodized training. Ideally, your body's going to adapt most effectively, like when there are easier workouts and you are pulled back, right? And I think that creates a lot of like trust in the science that's out there, trust in the training plan, trust in your body's response. And I think when there's a distrust of goal weight, of meal plan, of training plan, you're going to operate from a place sometimes of fear, right? And I think that's where we start to see things go sideways. Yeah.
Do you guys get a lot of patients who are there like post-injury? So the injury and having to sit out kind of prompted them to want to engage in behaviors? I'm assuming yes.
Yes.
So that's a common one to see then.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see kind of sometimes when injuries, I mean, Becca and I kind of conceptualize eating disorder as an injury. It's like a metabolic injury. And we kind of talk about in that language, athletes get injuries, physical injuries. I think just like a physical injury, kind of re-entry back into sport prematurely or too aggressively really increases risk of re-injury. So we use that language quite a bit. The human body and brain are so incredibly resilient. I'm just struck by this each and every day at people we see that are still able to function at pretty high levels, academically, professionally, vocationally, athletically. But I do think sometimes body does break down or will break down at some point. Like it's not immediate, it can be a season it's resilient, but usually sometimes when injuries do pop up, I do think it may be more, I don't know, it's more conducive for an athlete to get the care specifically to address their eating disorder, maybe than otherwise. I don't know if that's your take, Becca, or what.
Well, and honestly, I feel like the number one thing that pushes them to finally go get help is because when they're injured, they're not able to be as active and their anxiety goes through the roof.
Sure.
And you talked about metabolic injury too, which is unseen. It's not something you're going to get an x-ray and say, so it feels more wimpy, I guess. And very hard.
Yeah. And I think that can be a powerful thing just in terms of healing your metabolic functioning. And I think I had 2 conversations yesterday with high-level athletes that I'm working with that like they have actually gained weight in the process of like prolonged restriction. And it like it's hard to wrap your mind around that piece, but I think I'm providing care with Dr. Gaudiani on one of them, and she has such beautiful language around this too, but like also kind of really talked about kind of the metabolic injury, and we're trying to heal that. And it's counterintuitive to how to heal that, but nourishing yourself will kind of kick that metabolic functioning in high gear. And I have always thought of like the hallmark of fitness for me is a really high metabolic, resting metabolic rate. Like for me, that's like the pinnacle of fitness. And when you think about like not meeting energy needs or restriction, it actually like kind of slows that down. So, yeah.
So the 2 of you are doing a workshop. There's some things happening in your worlds. So I want our listeners, if they are piqued by your experience, both of you on this call, your huge amount of experience. What are you doing right now? Where can they find you?
Go ahead, Becca.
Well, so first of all, we will be at Arizona State on Saturday, May 14th, doing a workshop there. And then the following day, there's one at CPSDA, but that one excitingly is sold out. We were astounded that we weren't astounded because we knew that there was a desire for this. It sold out in minutes. So then that prompted us to have a third one on June 10th. And we're just uber excited because I know as a supervisor for dietitians, I've had more and more collegiate dietitians reaching out, others in private practice that are like, I want to be able to navigate this more effectively. I want to learn more about how these worlds, because sometimes you have to understand how the university is staged, like who's calling the shots, who's the medical director, what kind of staff do they have. It's unfair to ask, if they have a staff of 3 dietitians that are covering 500 athletes to be able to get the care that an athlete with an eating disorder deserves, they may have to triage that out. So these are things that we're going to cover, just a little snippet there in the workshop.
How long is the workshop? Oh, sorry, Riley.
Oh, no, I was just going to add the Arizona State workshop, I think is 5 hours and 5 hours. So we're offering CEs for these as well. The June 10th is a virtual workshop and that I think we're offering 4 CEs as well. And I think one of the things with Becca and myself, we feel tremendously passionate in working with athletes in this space, but also really privileged. And for both of us, I think we feel a tremendous duty to try to kind of communicate, convey. I can speak for myself. I know very little in this world, but totally. But I think in this space, we've had the luxury of having some unique experiences and kind of dropping into athletic departments and schools, and kind of seeing some of the challenges that just providers are up against, and even in outpatient practice too. And so we feel excited to try to learn from others, of course, but provide a platform where others can hopefully take some things away also and pick up some C's along the way, maybe.
That'd be so great. I mean, I remember talking to a couple of universities. Oh, we don't see eating disorders here. I'm like, okay, you're not asking the right questions.
You must be blind.
Yeah. And we see them everywhere, no matter what professional discipline you are listening. If you're listening, you're hearing this. No matter what professional discipline you're in, you're going to be seeing eating disorders and definitely disordered eating. And so having the psychology, if we could have Dr. Nickols in our pocket and Rebecca McConville in our pocket, you can learn from them through these avenues. So we'll make sure those are in the show notes, right?
And you kind of can have us in your pocket, because another thing that we've done before is when they don't necessarily want to send their athlete out, they may actually do like a specialty consultation where then you can provide feedback and guidance for that outpatient dietitian or dietitian that might be in that university setting. So I think that's another thing. There's a multitude of different ways that we can offer support in that sport and athletic realm that doesn't necessarily mean like hiring them into the staff.
Yep. And that can be looking at, current protocols, eating disorder protocols within an athletic department, or sitting on eating disorder treatment team virtually from afar in person. So I'm excited and available to kind of just fit needs of whatever that might be in whatever space, exists. So.
And, there's one that using the REDS, which you mentioned that Becca, is the relative energy deficiency in sport. That can be an entryway for people to not have to use the term eating disorder. It's performance, strength, power. You've got to get your energy levels up, and it may or may not be a full-blown eating disorder. Sometimes it doesn't require the treatment. It can just be like, you've got to fuel. You've got to fuel.
Most definitely.
Becca, can you maybe speak to that about how, like, kind of the REDS kind of language and talking about that, and then that captures more athletes, would you say, in general, and then kind of how you work and finesse that to suss out more eating disorder?
Yeah, definitely. So, when you're looking at REDS and kind of the larger student athlete body, you have to start doing more preventative education up front, because the screening tools more than likely aren't going to catch them. But it opens up the door for like, oh, I can get a bone stress injury or a stress fracture by not eating enough. Or, oh, the reason I might have lost my cycle is because I'm unintentionally underfueling. I forgot that when I shifted from high school to college, I started running 20 miles an hour. 20 miles an hour. That's fast.
That's fast. That's quite an athlete.
20 miles a week more. I should have probably eaten more. And what comes to the surface, though, is if it's unintentional, they're going to do whatever. So like Dr. Kate Bennett always has like the driven athlete and the disordered athlete. And the person that's had that undiagnosed eating disorder, they struggle big time. And I think that's where then having that mental health clinician, sports psychologist to send to, like, gosh, when I asked them to start eating a little bit more carb at breakfast, they were going to throw something at me. I think this is just a little bit more than underfueling. And so it helps that we got them in the door, got them started, but now we can get them the next level of help that they need and deserve. Is that what you meant, Riley? Did I answer that?
Exactly. You said it far better than I could. Yes.
Okay.
So where could people reach you guys and find all of this great information?
Well, you all know where to find me. Riley, you got to share where they can find you.
Mind, Body, Endurance. So 3 words, mindbodyendurance.com. So comprised of obviously myself, but then other mental health providers kind of specializing in treating athletes for sport performance issues, more clinical issues, and of course, kind of eating concerns as well. And then most recently, right, Becca, is it okay? Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Okay. Most recently, absolutely overjoyed to have Becca on board as well. And she's going to be our sport nutrition kind of director, kind of overseeing that piece and wing of kind of mind, body endurance too. So the hope is to kind of have other really passionate, skilled, qualified dietitians such as Becca to come on board too, to kind of collaborate and kind of multidisciplinary approach kind of in-house somewhat.
Yeah, to have that peer consult. Excited.
Awesome. That's amazing. Congrats, Becca.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm not going anywhere from Best, but I will be the virtual director to help just kind of nurture and be able to have that collaborative group with sports dietitians that do want to have that intersection with eating disorder. So we're really excited then to have that collaborative group that he already has there.
So if Ron and Roberta were the godparents, then you two are the parents. You two are the...
Well, now, wait a minute. We got to come up with something.
It's a little more fun than that. The fun aunt and uncle or whatever.
The crazy uncle. Yeah.
The crazy uncle. And
Can I at least be like an OG or something? Like...
So Riley, a wrap-up question we have for you then. If you were to take yourself back into entering the field of eating disorders, what do you wish you would have known then that you do know now?
Oh boy. That's such a good question. Wow. I think like a lot of things in life, you don't know what you don't know. And I think the more that I found out about this field, the more I realized how much I don't know. And so I think I would have told myself, just be patient, be a sponge. And I've learned most from other providers, and I learned just such a wealth of information, just talking about style, philosophy, like approaches. And I think for me, that's been so energizing. And so I think I would have told myself like, hang in there, because I think I kind of had a vision, but it actually was very short-sighted in terms of what is possible. And then I think like teaming up with like Becca and other providers, it just really has energized me. So I think, I think I would have told myself to buckle up, because it's been a fun ride, and then to keep learning and kind of keep trying to share and disseminate information. And most importantly, to keep kind of trying to help athletes and support athletic departments and sport providers and eating disorder professionals too. So
yeah. Don't be too hard on yourself. Be a sponge, be patient, because I've been in the field 30 years now, and there's so much I don't know. Right. Yep. And that's the whole idea of this podcast, is to bring in all different areas of specialty and connect people with the resources for their areas, for their clients, patients, athletes.
But Beth, I have to call you out on something on your own podcast. Would you give yourself credit for the amazing clinician that you are?
Thank you.
Yeah,
I do like my work. I love my work. I do. And but you've seen me, Becca, because we have, and that's one thing, Becca and I, our standards are up there, and we do require that we have our peer consults, and we bounce ideas off of each other, because even if you say that I'm a good clinician, and I most 90% of the time I leave my time with my client and I feel really great about where we're going, there's those other times it's like, oh, I know nothing. I feel like I know nothing.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is I would tell myself to keep a sense of humor. And I think that the work we do is really, really hard and heavy. And I think I've found providers who have longevity in the field really kind of are able to appropriately be serious, of course, and kind of meet their clients where they're at, but also there needs to be some joy in it and some humor, or else it's just really tough. And
I love that. I couldn't have been in the field this long without some of that, and definitely the people. Now that I've got Becca with me, she definitely.
We had peer consult over the dinner table and the kitchen.
Yeah, that is right.
Get any better.
All right. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Abby.
Yes. Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Beth.
Let's lean on each other and learn from each other so we can grow together as professionals in this field of eating disorders. If you want to connect with me for supervision or membership with monthly content, please find me at bethharrell.com/professionals.